Hello, this is Emily Brackett, President of Visible Logic, and thanks for joining me on this webinar, Branding for Startups. Today we'll be talking about how to build your startup's brand to attract customers and investors. So welcome and thanks for taking the time to join this webinar. Again, my name is Emily Brackett. I'm president of Visible Logic, a design and branding firm in Portland, Maine. We work with a lot of startups helping to develop brand identities, their logos, their websites, their content for their websites. We do a lot of content marketing, such as writing blogs and creating infographics, all to create engagement and help launch new startups. So today we're going to talk about branding, and I think what is a really good idea is to start with a definition of branding. And so we're all on the same page there. There's a lot of different definitions of branding. It could be your logo, your reputation, your visual identity. It can be something more abstract, such as your reputation or even a promise. And it also comes back to the idea of customer service and your whole image. So what I'm starting here is a definition of branding that I like to use, just so we can all work from the same vocabulary. So I define branding as branding is creating a unique name and image for a product in the consumer's mind. Product, it could really be product or service there. So let's look at all the different elements of this. So first, branding is creating a unique name and image for a product. So that means that to be unique, it needs to be different, it needs to be recognizable. And that is something that is an important part of branding. It has to be different than everybody else to make it so it's memorable. The second point is a name. So branding does involve your actual name of your product, service, or organization. That name ends up developing into your logo. It also drives things like your website URL, maybe your Twitter handle. All of those pieces are giving you a specific name. It may be your own name or it may be separate from you as the startup founder, but your name is part of your brand. And then the word image. The word image certainly starts with your logo, but it goes beyond that to other visuals, other key visuals such as photography, color, and typography. I also want to give you an image in your mind, which is imagine reading a book, and as you read a book, you develop in your own mind an idea of what a character looks like, what they sound like, what the landscape looks like, what the environment looks like. And we all do this just by reading words. And so words and the tone of your words are an important part of building an image for your brand that may be beyond the actual specific visuals. Finally, branding is in the consumer's mind. When you think about that cliche question, if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? If nobody is hearing about your brand, if it's not even registering, do you have a brand? That's part of it. If you're just out there but nobody knows about you, is it really a brand? I don't know. And even if it is registering, how your message is received may be different than how you intended. The way you wanted to present yourself and position yourself may not be how everybody is actually hearing it and taking it in. They have their own way of synthesizing your brand. So it's not all in your control. So these are really important, all the different facets of why branding is such a complex word and yet why it's so important. So you might be wondering, why invest in branding? And here are a few really important reasons. The first one is it can allow you to charge a premium. look at these two watches, one by Rolex, one by Timex. The status associated with a Rolex watch allows them to charge a premium. Look, they both keep time. Why not buy 10 Timex watches, even if they're going to not work as well? It's all about being able to charge a premium. There's so many times where people will say, you know what, I'm just going to pay. It doesn't have to be in multiples like this. People will do this a lot with electronics. I'm going to pay a little more for the known brand rather than the unknown brand. People are willing to charge a premium for something they know and recognize and trust, and that's all about branding. Branding also makes selling easier. When you think about going to the Apple store, do you think all those Apple associates, those geniuses, are trained on how to close a sale? No, they don't have to. All they have to do is keep maintaining that Apple brand. People are lined up for their products, and it's all about just maintaining that same brand experience. So if people know they want to work with you because you're a recognizable brand, it makes selling easier. And I use these two very large, recognizable consumer brands because they're easy for people to understand those values. But it can mean, this applies to small businesses, it applies to B2B brands, everything. I'll just give you a quick example of a local restaurant. This is not owned by my family, although they have the same last name as me. This is a little restaurant in Rockport, Massachusetts, and it's been there for years. On the left is what their old signage used to look like. About a year or so ago, they rebranded with the logo and signage on the right. And you can think about how much you're willing to pay for a meal at each of these restaurants. You're expecting a better service, better quality on the right-hand side. You're also ready to pay $5, $10 more for your meal there. And that is what you can get by investing in branding. So again, just to recap, why invest in branding? You're going to attract better clients and customers. You're going to be able to charge a premium for your products and services. You can close sales more easily. And eventually, you will have reduced marketing costs. Now, this is not when you're in the startup phase, it may not feel that way. It may actually feel like, wow, I'm spending more on design right now. But the idea is that every time somebody sees, let's say, your logo, it's so recognizable, so professionally done, that it will reduce marketing costs in the long run. And then there's also the long-term goal of greater value in selling the business. A company that has a strong brand identity, it's an intangible asset that can have quite a lot of value. So again, if anybody has questions along the way, go ahead. I'm glad some people are making some questions and comments. Do you think that Bracket's new logo is really that good, though? Was it really good? Did it say anything about the restaurant? Well, that's a great question. With that question of the restaurant, people do change when you upgrade your branding, which is not a startup position to be in. This is an existing restaurant in business for a long time. They rebranded. There can be some changing expectations. Sometimes it could be that they'd upgraded their menu, yet they were having trouble attracting people, or people maybe were a little bit, they weren't happy with the price points based on the initial branding. And so positioning themselves as, hey, this is an upscale meal, that's what you're going to get. People are prepared for that with that branding. So sometimes it can be that you've changed your direction and you need a new brand identity to keep up with that and reinforce it. Sometimes it can be the other way around, where you launch the new logo as a way of introducing, let's say, a new menu that's going to be higher priced. So they need to coordinate together. Obviously, any changes to your product, but that's the reason also as a startup, you avoid that whole changing directions. You come out of the gate strong with a great, strong, high quality brand identity. Okay, so let's talk. Sorry, here, missed a poll here. I have a poll that I would like you to take. So what I'd like to find out here is what stage is your startup at? So are you in sort of the product development? And by that, I mean, you're kind of figuring out what is my product or service or company, but I'm not really in the market yet. The second one would be I'm there, but I'm just starting. It's maybe not my main job at this point. It's very low revenue at this point. Or the third is, you're fully in the marketplace. So if you guys could all just take this quiz, this little question. So are you really in the before market, just entered the market, or fully in the marketplace? And we'll just give everybody a moment. Okay, great. Okay, this is very interesting. Great. So I'm going to close this out and I'm going to share the results with you, which is that everybody has launched to some degree here. So that's really interesting for me to hear, because I've given this talk other times, and there's often people who are really just in the preliminary, really early stages. So that's great. So everybody here, actually, we have more people already in the marketplace, and that's great. I'll keep that in mind as we keep talking. Okay, so let's talk about differentiation. So again, branding is creating a unique name and image for a product in the consumer's mind. So there needs to be something that's different about you and about your brand. And I'm going to just give you a sort of a typical scenario that I see often, both with clients who come to Visible Logic, and I just see it in the marketplace in general. You look around at the competitive landscape, and this is just a typical thing. Oh, there's about 4 other businesses I can identify. And, some are a little bit bigger, some are a little bit smaller, some are positioning themselves slightly different, but they're all sort of doing the same thing. So many people make the mistake of saying, hey, I'm going to squeeze right in here. By doing this, you haven't differentiated yourself. You're still in the same space. You're doing the same thing. There's a big squeeze, hard to stand out. So what we would recommend is move aside, do something different, and do it big and bold and different. And this is what you want to think about, is how you can differentiate yourself. So I have a takeaway for you, which is a to-do. So what I want you to do if you're in this field is look at your competitors and figure out how you're different. Okay, some typical differentiators are geography. If you run something that's bricks and mortar or a local service, geography is certainly part of it. How far, maybe somebody's doing this but not in your neighborhood or in your city or in your state or in your region. You could also differentiate the type of buyer. Somebody's doing this, someone else is doing this, but they're attracting this clientele, and I want to attract this slightly different audience. So those are the buyers. You could differentiate on the typical buyer you want to attract. Now, I've said price there. As I said, the great thing about branding is you shouldn't have to be saying we're the low-cost provider. That's not a great business model to start with, so let's try to avoid that. Finally, you want to think about all of this. You may have heard this before. Instead of focusing on the features, how would these benefit your buyers? What is the benefit that is different than something your competitors are doing? And finally, I want you to think about the do-it-yourselfers. Depending on what business you're in, the do-it-yourselfers, it may be a choice not between you and a competitor, but between you and the person deciding to do it themselves. So what do you have to offer? Is it convenience? Is it safety? Is it time saved? Why would somebody decide, rather than do it themselves, that it's worth it to go to you? Okay, we're going to move on to naming. And sorry, I'm just keeping up with some of the questions and comments here. We can get back to some of this if we want some more discussion about that at the end, John, about the logo. So naming. So again, branding is creating a unique name and image. So your name is so important. You need to get it right, okay? This is a long-term proposition with your name. Probably of anything in your brand identity, the name is the hardest to change. It's very likely that your marketing materials and website will change over the years. Your logo might even change, but your name is very, very difficult to change. Certainly it's been done, but it's better to get it right the first time. These are 4 things that I think are important for a strong brand name. Number 1 is easy to say or pronounce. Excuse me. You don't want people to look at your name and not know how to say it. Ideally, it's easy to spell as well, but it just, if people's first reaction is, I don't know how to say that, that's a big hurdle for people, and it's just a bad first impression. Definitely needs to be memorable and distinct. That's important. Sorry, I got a little cough here. That's, if it's not distinct, it's going to be harder for you to, for people to remember it. And it should not cause confusion. I can't tell you how many times, like I'll go to, I was at a conference recently and there was a startup pitch going as part of the conference. And some of these people had these names. And I'm like, I don't know what you do. Now, there's a couple layers of, I don't know what you do. Sometimes people think, oh, that's sort of intriguing. But the problem is, it's that if the first impression of you is one of confusion, that's not really a solid feeling to start out with. And the other thing is people like to put people into boxes. And so if it's okay, as long as with just a little bit of information, then they can clearly understand what you do, it works. What can be hard is if you've created confusion in the true sense where somebody has pigeonholed you incorrectly, it's hard to overcome that. And I do think it's important that a relevant domain name is available. So that's the URL. I do recommend trying to find a .com. There are people, who are using .biz, and there's more and more of these other domain names coming up. But the reality is that many, many people will automatically type in .com. So if there is another organization using that .com that would be confusing with you, you need to reconsider. Now, you may be able to find some sort of identifier like for example, we worked with a company, Cream and Sugar, and they were a bakery, so they became Cream and Sugar Bakery or Cream and Sugar Portland. Something either that talks about your vertical industry or your geography or some sort of qualifier on there. You do want to make sure whoever has the related straight.com is not going to be a competitor, that if somebody goes to that website, that there's not going to be a confusion that, they'll keep going to find your website. So your take-home homework here is really think about it. Is your name right? If you are in startup mode, even if you've hit the marketplace, if it's wrong, fix it now. It's just going to become more and more of a problem, more and more of a weight hanging around. If you've been hearing from people like, oh, I didn't get it. What's up with that name? I didn't know how to say it or spell it, or I didn't know what it meant. Now is the time to take care of that before you've had it for years and years, because it's just going to make your job much, much more difficult. Now, if you don't have a name, or you've decided now you need a new name, here's some advice on how to get started on that. First thing I like to do is write a list of adjectives to describe yourself and your offerings, okay? So it might be you're friendly, you're casual, you're succinct, you are detail-oriented, you are big picture, you are located in the Soho neighborhood of New York City. All sorts of adjectives. They could be one word or phrases that talks about you, your offering, and your differentiators. Another way to extract that then is to think of objects or feelings that express this. This is a good way to end up with a little more creative name, but still has that same connotation because it's reflective of the same feelings and adjectives behind it. And I'm just going to give you an example. We were asked to work on naming and building the brand identity for a new yoga studio in Portland, Maine. They had a very high touch style. So you go in there, they're going to give you a lot of personalized attention. They had built out a beautiful space in a calm environment. It was a unique and beautiful studio right on the waterfront of Portland. They had a very thoughtful and approach, full mind-body approach, not very different than maybe a power yoga that was really focused on just the physical side. And they really meant for it to be a calming place where people could work on their yoga practice and de-stress. So the name, we showed them many options, but what they came up with, Still Water Yoga, is what we chose. So it captured the place, it captured that calm feeling. So again, is your name right? If you're not sure, fix it now. Also, if you're looking to get some feedback from me and other business owners, next week we're going to do a 90-minute mastermind call where you can show what's in progress. It could be your name, your logo, your website, and you can get some feedback both from me as a professional and other startup founders doing their own work. And there's a link right on the homepage at visiblelogic.com, or you can go to this bit.ly address. And if you register, and by the end of the day tomorrow, we've reduced the price to $20, but otherwise it'll be $29, 90 minutes of everybody will get a chance to show their work and get some critique on it. Okay, so let's talk about the importance of design and branding. Obviously, we are a design firm, and when people think of branding, one of the big things people think of is logo design. So that is because branding is creating a unique name and image for a product in the consumer's mind. We are visual beings, and you can't get over that. You have to accept that your visual representation of your product or service or organization is integral to your brand identity. And visuals are at the core of this process that people use to learn about companies and services they want to use. People call this know me, like me, trust me, buy from me. If you can't recognize them, there's a big hurdle to getting to know the company because you're not making connections with them. Every time you see them, you don't remember who they are. That's this strong visual connection really solidifies that know me part quickly. And I just want to take a minute to talk about the difference between design and branding, how they're the same, how they're different. So an example, all good design you should choose readable fonts. But for building a brand identity, you want to think about choosing a set of what will become corporate fonts. You always use the same fonts. Same thing with color. There's certainly better and worse ways to use color effectively, but for your brand identity, you really want to think about your corporate colors, which are normally pulled from your logo, and those are your core colors, and you repeat them over and over again. Same thing with imagery. We could look at a piece of a graphic or photography or an illustration, and there's many, many, many styles that are still high quality. But if you want to develop it into a consistent brand identity, you want to use those always in the same way. And this is where the idea of whether a template might work or might not work. A template could be well designed. It could have nice proportion and readable fonts and good contrast and a wonderful color palette. But if it doesn't reflect your own brand identity, it's not going to be effective for you. And then the other thing that goes beyond design, of course, are those non-visual elements like the tone and voice. And that can be seen in design elements, but also in the messaging, in the content, and maybe even things like customer service, all those things that go way beyond design. So design is an important core quality of branding, but it's not everything. Okay, so let's look then at logos and what is important with logos. So I have 5 musts for your logo. So most of you said you're already in markets. You may have a logo. And so take a look at these and see if you feel like it's working for you. It needs to be distinct from your competitors. There's several genres of people who are guilty of not being distinct, like law firms. Hey, let's use serif typeface and list the partners' names, and we'll use, very not distinct colors. So it's hard to keep one straight from another. So it needs to be, look at your competitors. Do you stand out? It shouldn't be more of the same. It should be distinct. Is it memorable? Is there something about it that, yeah, you know what? People are going to remember what that looks like, whether it's a certain splash of color or a shape or the actual symbol itself. Is it memorable? Is it easily reproducible? It used to be back in the day, you had to have a black and white version in case you did a newspaper ad or you faxed something. And a lot of people have stopped worrying about that in this digital age. They're thinking, well, it's only going to be online. It's okay if there's gradations and other elements to it. I will tell you from having worked with all sorts of companies over many years that almost always this comes back and bites them. If they have a logo that cannot be easily reproducible in like one color or low resolution settings, very small, that's a big thing now. People need to make, a fav icon for the browser bar. All of these things, it needs to be very reproducible in a lot of different ways and still be recognizable. And then it should work in the places and sizes and shapes that you need. So, for example, we did a logo recently for a software company. And normally, I would say it's best to think about logo groupings that are somewhat square or circular in format. But their primary place where they would be putting this logo had to be a very horizontal arrangement because of how it was going to fit into their piece of software that they were developing. And so that was important. We needed to know that and develop for that specific shape. So if you have an application that you know is going to be important to you, a retail window, an embroidered shirt, your an online application, make sure that it works there first. And then it needs to look professional. There's really no other way around it. It needs to look professionally done. People can, it doesn't have, you might have the skills to do it yourself, but the end result needs to look professional. And finally, it does not need to be a symbol. You can use like a logo type or word mark, which is what it's called. You think about Coca-Cola, they have the scripty type. There isn't necessarily a symbol. And sometimes going without a symbol can be a lot more cost-effective way to work with a designer and to develop a logo. So what I'd like you to do, if you have a logo, think about your logo and does it match that list of adjectives that you've developed? Okay, if it doesn't, if you're not finding it as reminiscent of the list of adjectives, that's where people end up with like, oh, that's a great logo, but it doesn't build the right brand image. And I'm going to show you here what we ended up doing for Stillwater Yoga. So as you said, as I mentioned, they had a very hands-on approach. We ended up actually creating this in pen and ink and then digitizing it. The calm nature of the waterfront location. And so this is, I think it really clearly reflects all of their adjectives that they had put out up front. So finally, if you have a logo, make sure it's professionally designed. Make sure you have the vector files. It should not be a bitmap file. So that's normally an Adobe Illustrator file you want from your logo designer and not just a JPEG. And you also want to think about your additional visual library. So that could be photography. It could be sometimes you have a family of icons that helps tell the brand message. Think about all of the other pieces beyond your logo that build your visual brand identity. I'm just going to take one breather here, see if anybody has any questions. Great. I think we're looking good. Okay. So one thing I get a lot of questions about is personal versus corporate branding. Personal branding is a big buzzword right now, and how much of your own personal brand should affect your corporate brand. And I'm going to, before I answer that, I'm going to launch another poll here, which I would like to know what kind of business are you starting? So I have 5 options here. Solopreneur or consultant, that means, or freelancer, it's you, no other employees, not a product, and that's probably what your goals are long term. The second one is a service-based business, but it's more than one person, so it could be a law firm, any other sort of firm, but is selling a service. The third one is a hard product. You've invented something new and you're selling it. And the fourth is a technology, which could be a software or electronic product. And the fifth is a brick and mortar type of situation, like a retail or a restaurant. So I am going to launch this poll. And if you could tell me what kind of company you're working on right now. Okay, well, we're kind of all over the map, so that's fine. So 25% of you are a consultant, 25% a hard product, 25% technology, 25% retail. Nobody's doing a larger scale service-based business. Okay, interesting. So we're going to just talk about everything equally here. Okay, so when you think about personal branding versus corporate branding, it's a spectrum. On the one hand, you have consultants and freelancers, maybe people who are public speakers and personalities. Their personal brand is completely, that is it. They are, the individual and the business are one and the same. On the other hand, you have a large corporation, which can be very faceless. And there's a lot of people in the middle, like a hairstylist. Maybe you go to your hairstylist and they work at one salon, but then they move to another salon, and you move with him or her because you're more connected to them than they're the owner, than the salon itself. It might be a person who runs more than one business, so that can be like, oh, it's the personal nature comes in as part of it. Then there's a group of people who are like real estate brokers, financial planners, insurance reps. And while they have a corporate brand that's a very strong brand identity and an umbrella for everything they do, you usually choose those people because of the person, even though their personal brand is not necessarily expressed visually. And then a small business owner, which most startups, basically, you all start as a small business. You may be trying to build something larger, but initially it's a lot about the founder. And here are just a few examples. So On the highly personal side might be your CPA or lawyer, especially if they're a one-person shop. It's them, and you go to them because they are the expert. On the other end of the spectrum is Coca-Cola. I don't know it's not like if somebody asked me who the CEO of Coca-Cola is, I don't know. I don't really connect anybody with any human beings with that brand. But there can be brands like Steve Jobs, and Apple is a great example, and there's many others these days, where even though they're large companies, their CEO or other top people are so highly visible and so integral part of that brand that they still matter. And at the beginning, as a startup, you're an integral part of your brand. But it is good to think about where you want to be growing your business, how much you want to keep your personal brand as part of that. So we did have about a quarter of you saying you are a solopreneur. So if you're a solopreneur, I think it's really important that your brand identity, like it speaks to you, it connects to you, you feel passionate about it. If you feel any sort of disconnection between maybe what your designer has shown you as your brand identity, it's going to always feel fake and false to you, and it's going to cause a problem. So if you're a solopreneur, do you like your name and your logo and your website? Does it feel right to you? If it doesn't, I think you need to make it more authentic for you, to make it work for you. And it's okay to don't feel like you have to do something different because this is what the other people tell you to do or something like that. It needs to feel good to you. Now, if you're a startup founder, the startup identity eventually will grow bigger than the founder's identity. But initially, the people behind every startup is critical. So I have some to-dos for you. The two big things that you need to do is have bios written for all of your founders on your website. This is probably the number one thing we see when we try to market startups, is that people want to know, well, if I'm going to invest in this product or service, how do I know that these people are going to follow through? They're not going to just be a fly-by-night organization. They're going to get that validation from the startup. So you need to give information about your experience, who you are, that there's a real person. It's not just some PO box. So put real people with real contact information and real biographies on your website, and definitely get a professional headshot of yourself. Portray yourself in a way that's recognizable and professional. Okay, do we have any other questions about personal versus corporate branding? Looks like we're good. Okay, so now I want to talk about the two-sided factor of branding. So going back to our original statement that branding is in the consumer's mind, okay? So the identity you build plus the perceptions of others is what your actual brand is. You do not have complete control over everything. And I'm just going to give you a quick example of this. So United has a great logo, and they have this tagline, "Fly the friendly skies." And this is the image they're pushing, right? Friendly staff, great service, happy pilots, great brand experience. This is the image they're pushing. But this is the customer perception, right? Cramped quarters, stuffing your bags in because you got to pay for baggage charges, terrible food, long lines with surly employees. So this is the part of the brand experience that you don't have complete control over, but you do need to work on. You need to ensure that the customer experience matches the brand promise. This is what people get mad about. If somebody said, "We're a no-frills airline, it's cheap," people feel better about it. But when you try to portray yourself as something that you're not, and there's this disconnect there, people get mad. So think about your own business. If your list of adjectives is, "Oh, we're very detail-oriented," you need to make sure you take care of details appropriately. If you say you're very big picture oriented, then look at the big picture and make sure that's clear, that promise gets fulfilled. So let's talk about how you can make your brand work for you. This is a typical scenario we see with small businesses. You really want to always think about consistency and repetition, okay? But you want to go beyond your logo. So here's the confused, weak brand image. So you get somebody, they design a logo for you, it looks good. You get somebody else to work on the web design, it's a little bit off, there's not the brand identity is not quite in sync. Oh, somebody's going to write the copy for the brochure and the website now. It doesn't match the tone at all. Oh, and hey, let's try out social media and see if we can get something to go viral. And yeah, this is going to be a great push, but it's completely disconnected from everything else we've done. And then the sales process is way over here doing its own thing, and the customer experience is terrible. And the founder is pretty much just not present. You can't connect with them. You don't know who's running the business. Now let's look at another option when you have consistent branding and how it can amplify everything you do. You have a great, strong corporate identity. You build a website that mirrors and builds on that brand identity. The marketing copy reflects that same tone in the words. Social media is also, you're talking about the same things, presenting it graphically the same way, always connecting your brand identity back to a trusted message. The sales process is also in line, and the customer experience, it's all phenomenal, and it's what they expect. And the founder is out there touting the same message. As you can see, everything's aligned, everything's working together, and it's just a much stronger experience. And this is the benefit of having a strong brand identity that's completely cohesive. So your to-do is to look objectively at your brand, from identity to message to service, and see where is it all aligned and where is it not aligned. Okay, so a big question I get is when to invest in branding. You're a startup, what does that mean? I'm not sure how many people are trying to attract investors, but investors may not care about your brand. If they feel like, many investors will say branding is a problem, they know it can be solved, okay? If they're more concerned about other issues, such as, is this scalable? Is this really going to get to market on time? Is there really buyers who are going to pay at this price point? Those kind of questions. They're usually pretty comfortable that branding will get taken care of once you have the funding to pay for some good design work. So on that hand, if you're trying to attract investors, you may not need to invest in branding right away. But it's really important to polish your brand before you reach the market on a large scale, because it can be so hard to overcome poor first impressions. So this is where, like, retail stores, restaurants, consumer products need to come out of the gate strong with a clear, well-defined position in the marketplace, professional design and branding, and you need to do it right from the start. I hear of people who, for example, maybe you have a product and you're starting small scale with fairs and farmers markets, depending on what it is you're selling. And then you're thinking, well, I'm going to go into Whole Foods next. Well, one of two things is going to happen. Either the retailers are not going to be interested in your product because it doesn't look professionally designed. It doesn't meet their, they've got set the bar of professionalism. And if yours does not look like it, they're not going to even consider your product. The second part there is, even if they said, okay, we're going to take it into our stores and, you're going to move into our retail market with your product, or then you decide, oh, I have the funds now, and now I'm going to change my packaging. Let's say that's going to cause a lot of confusion. You've tried to finally build a reputation, and to change your packaging and brand identity at that time is not something we recommend. So if it is that type of product, you need to polish it before you reach the market on a large scale. But I think the number one takeaway here is that a great brand identity should grow with your business. It should be an asset that just keeps gaining in value. It shouldn't box you in a way that feels like you've outgrown it too quickly. It should be flexible enough that as you grow, it grows with you, but has a strong core that it becomes this little nugget that as you grow, it's a little thread that goes through everything. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. I want to see if anybody has questions, and I'm going to, there's a little question box here, so please go ahead and ask away. Let's see. And while you're writing that up, while you're writing in your questions, I'm going to just remind you that this is being videotaped, and so I will send the recording out and the slides by email tomorrow. If you're looking for feedback on your name, tagline, website, or other materials, then consider joining this online mastermind workshop that we're having. It'll be 90 minutes. You'll ask you to submit these materials ahead of time so we can present it to the group. You'll get feedback from me as well as other business owners. It'll be a little bit of a networking opportunity. So consider that. And okay, so I have one question here, which is, I have a logo, but it's not great. So should I redo it or keep it? I get this question a lot. Like, people skimp on the logo and then they're starting to grow and they're saying, well, should I redo it or should I just keep it? I think the best advice there is to try to improve it in a way that has a connection to the original one, the original design. Like, I haven't seen what you have, but if it were, for example, maybe the concept is good. It's a green tree in a field, but the execution of it doesn't look professional. Then you could recreate it in a very professional way with a tree in a field and maybe some of the key colors. But the actual execution and the style of it would look a lot more professional. That's definitely a great way if you can do it, because people will make that connection. And it's almost like saying, hey, we're better than we were before, but we still have this history. So that's definitely my first advice back, is if you can somehow make a connection but make it better. That's my way of redoing logos whenever possible. Sometimes it's not possible. You just got to throw it out. Any other questions? Let's see. Okay, so I have one other question, which is, yeah, like, how much does it cost for a good website these days? I get asked this question a lot, and I've decided that this is my answer. Okay, I feel like there's sort of 3 zones of websites. The first is free or very low cost. Okay, and you have very little money. What I would recommend is you probably get a not free but low cost WordPress theme, and you work with that and make the most of it. You have risked very little money and you have a web presence. I think it's really important that you have a web presence. Even if it's a 1-page website, you've got to have it, and it's got to look professional, okay? Then the next step up from that is often these like sort of low cost web designers who might charge you anywhere from like $1,000 to $3,000 to do a website for you. And I really worry about that. I sort of call it the dead zone, because what that is you're often you think, oh, this is great because it's customized to my needs, but often they actually, maybe some of their web development has not been tested as rigorously as a well-used, low-cost WordPress theme, for example. You might have security issues. You probably will run into issues as you need to expand your website, as your startup. The thing with startups is they're often growing and changing quite a lot in the early years. So you're going to find that your needs for your website change, and then you've spent like what to you seems like a lot of money for something that doesn't work for you very quickly. So I tend to I try to steer people away from that dead zone in the middle. Then after that, you're really talking about, $10,000 and up, and you're talking about developing a custom design. You're looking at the messaging in addition to other elements all together. And that, there comes a time when you need to do that in order to compete, in order to have a really professional look that's customized to your brand and your product or service. And it's going to come a time where you need to do that. But I would try to sort of avoid that little middle part where you're kind of spending what could be significant money for you and not necessarily getting a lot back. Hopefully that was helpful. Okay, that is all the questions. And I thank everybody for attending. And like I said, this will be emailed to you tomorrow. Thank you very much.